you all here today. This is a momentous occasion for the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council and to achieve certification of the Metro LEC Child Abduction Response Team. Most of the remarks about the team and certification will be made by my guest Phil Keith and by Chief Brian Clark. I did just want to make a few introductions and make people in the room aware of folks who are here. So first and foremost, Phil Keith, who is here. He is the director of the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program, which is run by the United States Department of Justice. He's the gentleman who is here, who's flown here to present the award to Metro LEC. I also want to point out, right in the center of the room, Chief Ken Berkowitz is the president of the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council. I want to also point out Chief Brian Clark, who's here. He's the control chief of the Criminal Investigation Division, and the Child Abduction Response Team falls under him. Steve Williams is our executive director, retired chief from the Franklin Police Department, who's here. I also want to point out Detective Lieutenant Greg Lennon of the Cohasset Police Department and Sergeant Chris Golden, who are CART detectives who are deeply involved in setting up the, making sure that Metro CART achieved the standards that were needed to achieve certification. And then last but not least, from the Metro side, I want to introduce Chief Russ Jenkins of the Braintree Police Department, who is in charge of Metropolitan Special Tactics and Response, which handles, of course, the ground search and the tactical sides of Metro. Also, you know, no project like this would be complete without the participation of our law enforcement partners. I want to introduce and thank Kevin White of the FBI, who has not only come out for the ceremony, but who has been our law enforcement partner all along. FBI Boston and the RA at Lakeville have been terrific to work with. He was here and involved in the drill itself. I also want to point out a couple of role players. The abducted girl is Erin Kelly, and Erin Kelly is back with us today. She was rescued, of course, during the drill last July, so she's sitting in the back beside her father, Lieutenant Peter Kelly, who is the commanding officer of the Computer Crimes Unit at Metro. And the bad guy, the abductor, is my son Kevin Brooks, an officer of the Wellesley Police Department, who's also here this morning. So I just want to acknowledge them and thank them for volunteering their time and helping us out. The drill itself would not have been successful without my having the support of my Board of Selectmen. I see Paul Bishop, who's here, and I think Ellen Howard was here earlier but may have left. The board and town government was phenomenally supportive. We went around and notified all of the residents in the affected Westover neighborhood so that they would know what was going on, because they were going to be subjected to knocks on the door and roadblocks run by the Metro motorcycle unit and so forth. We did not receive a single complaint throughout the day that we ran this drill, so I want to thank those residents. I also want to thank the officers of my department, both detectives and patrol division, who responded and participated in the drill throughout the day. So without any further ado from me, it's my pleasure to introduce the Control Chief for the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council Criminal Investigation Division, Chief Brian Clark from the Norwood Police Department.
Thank you. It's not often that you hear that Brooks is a suspect. In 2006, Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council started a new initiative called Metro CART, which is the Child Abduction Response Team. We recognized that time is of the essence when it comes to finding a missing or abducted child. And we looked at, what would happen if your community, if Molly Bish went missing in your community, how would your community be able to handle that? And the aim was to have the necessary trained resources prepared to deploy to the scene of a missing or abducted child. This process, this initiative, was directed by a steering committee, and all the Metro units, the SWAT team, RRT, Public Information, Computer Crimes Unit, Mobile Operation, Crisis Negotiations, received training in missing and abducted children. The primary training was through the Office of Justice Programs and Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through Fox Valley Technical College, who is directed by the AMBER program that's established by the Department of Justice. In the last 2 years, the Metro CART took on the endeavor of becoming a certified CART team. We reviewed our policies and procedures, making sure that not only they met the standards that the Department of Justice put together, but also surpassed them. And with the work that Lieutenant Greg Lennon and Kristen Golden, the countless hours that they put into this, this really came all together. So on July 23rd and 24th of last year, the assessors from the Department of Justice CART certification program came to Norwood to review our policies, ask pointed questions of our command staff and personnel, and observed a mock drill. And during this drill, the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council's CART team coordinated efforts through the Massachusetts State Police, Team Adam, and our partner, the FBI, along with the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. And I think what we'd like to do now is show you a brief segment of that drill.
On Wednesday, July 24th, 2013, the Norwood Police Department participated in a training drill with the Child Abduction Response Team of the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council. The mock exercise began with a staged child abduction in the area of Layton Road at approximately 8 a.m. Two role players acted as witnesses to the abduction and placed a simulated call to the Norwood Police to report the incident. After receiving the call, Norwood officers were sent to the scene to speak with the witnesses and gather information. A patrol supervisor, as well as detectives of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, also arrived on scene. A simulated Amber Alert was issued, and additional Metro resources were called in to assist. A command post was established at the Cleveland School. Resources gathered here, and officers from multiple agencies worked together with what information they had gathered to narrow down a suspect. As information was gathered and sorted at the command post, increased patrols were taking place in the area of the abduction. Members of the Metro Mobile Operations Division were mobilized and set up checkpoints on roadways in the area. Motorists were informed of the reason for the increased police presence and provided pamphlets from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Had a real abduction occurred, motorists would have been shown a photo of the child. At approximately 11:15, the command center received a tip about a vehicle matching the suspects parked up at the St. Timothy's parking lot with two occupants. The Metro SWAT team was activated and moved in on the vehicle. The operator of the vehicle was taken from the vehicle and placed into simulated custody. The abducted victim was safely escorted out of the vehicle into a secure spot. The child abduction response team had completed their task. Following the arrest and recovery, Chief Brooks and Chief Clark of the Norton Police addressed the media to answer any questions and to clarify how the suspect had been located. Participating agencies then met back at the Norwood PD for a discussion on what had occurred and how they could improve upon what had been exercised. If the recommendations of the evaluators are adopted, the Metrolec Child Abduction Response Team will be one of only 19 teams nationally certified by the U.S. Department of Justice.
Great video to show what happened that day for those that didn't see it. You know, when we were putting together what we were going to do for a drill and where we were going to hold it, Chief Brooks graciously said that he'd do it here. That's only fitting because he was one of the main leaders behind this whole process when we started it. And although I think he cursed my name a few times when we were going through this, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? It really, truly worked out. I'd like to call Greg Leonard, maybe to say a couple words real quick.
First, I'd like to thank my chief, Bill Quigley, for allowing me the time to put into this. Obviously, there were thousands of hours that went into this. I was taking away my responsibilities from Cohasset, so he deserves credit for permitting me to spend the necessary time to do this. I also want to thank, obviously, Chief Clark and Chief Brooks, whose brainchild this was originally, along with Sergeant Chris Golden, that I worked hand in hand with to put this whole thing together. There were literally thousands of hours that went into this. I was very humbled when I was asked by Chief Clark to become the commander of the CAR team after Chief Brooks stepped down to become the chief of Norwood. And very honored to be in this position, and I'm glad that we were able to get the team certified with everybody's cooperation. Thank you.
That's great. I'd like to introduce Phil Keith, the Program Director of the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program, for his words and presentation.
Good morning. On behalf of the Department of Justice and my boss, Assistant Attorney General Carol Mason, I want to thank you for inviting us to participate in this certification recognition, because it does mean so much to us. By now you figured out I'm not from the Northeast with your keen investigative experience. So but what we find with CART programs is that it eliminates the strategy that oftentimes law enforcement agencies fall back on. That's hope. In my dictionary, hope is the last stand. It's not a strategy. It's just a wish. And what you've done, like other agencies around the country, is you've taken a step which really requires a lot of commitment. I was telling somebody before we got started, my past role as a commissioner for CLIA, please no words. But the standards we put together for the CART program were not just mirrored after what CLIA has tried to do in regimenting and creating standards, but it's really to prepare organizations to respond to crises that involve children. And having worked with probably about 350 to 400 parents, child victims, and family members of abductions, there's only one thing a family ever wants when their child goes missing. They want their child home. In our case, sometimes we close a case saying it's closed because we found a body. But in a family, there's no recovery of any value other than have their child home, breathing, alive, and well. And what you've done as a community and as a region, which is so important, because no agency is big enough to tackle these things. It doesn't matter what size they are. We work with extremely large organizations, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. They'll be the first to tell you can't do it by yourself. So I think it really signifies the cohesiveness you have in this community. And it should send a message out. If it's not going out, the chiefs in the room should make sure it goes out. And that is, you're prepared and you care about children. Don't ever underestimate the value of that message. When you care about children, it means something. Most law enforcement executives, when they leave office, they have a building named after them or something like that. But there's not a greater legacy that a police chief can leave than they leave an organization that cares about children, and particularly children that are in crisis. 1.6 million children go missing every year. Only about half of them are reported to law enforcement. So there's a message in there that we need to make sure the community has confidence to report their children that are in crisis, whether they're endangered runaways or there's fear of an abduction, that we can and will respond appropriately, and that we will have a greater likelihood of recovering that child. In the South, we have the saying, it's one thing to look at a bull, but it's another thing to ride it. And what you've done through your exercises, you've ridden that bull. So you know what it's going to be like. You know, it may be, the dynamic may be different, but you're so much more prepared than your counterparts that have not participated. And we certainly hope that after today, that other agencies and other parts of Massachusetts will join, as you have, that upper echelon, if you will, of prepared communities to respond to children in crisis, particularly those that are abducted. So it's a pleasure to be here. Your accomplishments can't be overstated. We were talking about before we got started. We have about 126 agencies that are currently have CART teams, or CART programs, I should say. What we find is that about 3 out of 10 that crank up a CART program ultimately fail in it. They lose focus, they lose commitment. There's the turnover at the chief's level or somebody that's instrumental in putting it together. But what we found is that the certification, we have no turnover. Those are the agencies that really set the bar and are the gold standard for others to follow throughout the United States and Canada, as well as our work in Mexico. So it's a pleasure for me to be here this morning to recognize you for a tremendous accomplishment. And I'd like to, at this time, present a certificate on behalf of Carol Mason, the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs. Chief Brooks, you going to join me? Chief Clark? All the other chiefs? Great.
Executive Director.
You mention on behalf of Carol Mason, the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs, I want to recognize this community for achieving the development and enactment of a child abduction response team, and make sure the community knows you're most prepared. Congratulations.
Great, thank you very much. So I think unless you need to hear from anybody else, I think that's going to conclude, that concludes our ceremony. I think we did everything that we needed to do. I guess just a couple more acknowledgements, things I thought of sitting in the back of the room when I meant to point out, not necessarily each and every person by name, but we have a number of child abduction response team detectives that have joined us this morning. You can just kind of raise your hands and be acknowledged. We appreciate them. Now they won't do it, but there's a bunch of them that are all standing in the back with their backs to the wall and looking very stern and so forth. So I want to thank them for being here. From my own staff, I also want to thank my administrative assistant, Officer Kevin Grasso, who played a lot of the logistics for this. And I want to thank Officer Andrew Jurwich, who's the guy with the camera and the movie camera, and who made the video and posted on our website, norwoodpolice.com. You can see it there if you want. And did a lot of the does a lot of our social media, website, and technology. So I did want to thank.